Salam and peace. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, which covers coast to coast, north to south, east to west, the whole United States of America, as well as Canada and Mexico. Also on Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and of course, you're on iPhone. You can download an app on also our website, muslimnetwork.tv. Most foreign policies of the world don't change when government changes, but US foreign policies, however, in the last 4 years have a different type of a ride. So it's a good question to ask what changes President-elect Biden is going to bring. He's a more predictable person, has been in politics for 47 years, which I didn't know how to count, but Trump knows how to count, and he told the whole America about it, but he got elected anyway. So President-elect Biden's policies, what are they going to be? Something he has said already, climate change, Paris Climate Change Agreement, he wants to re-enter. Of course, reconnecting with his earlier administration with President Obama. He wants to strengthen the United Nations, increase cooperation with the World Health Organization, which we are disconnected with. And maybe United Nations, some people will be hopeful that he will increase some funding from the US as well for that. And he, going to be better with NATO and Western allies and all of that. But maybe on China, he will continue some of the existing policy. But we want to talk about the areas not many people in America talk about. These areas didn't even pop up in any democratic presidential debate or in the presidential debate between Biden and President Trump. Questions like what will happen to war in Afghanistan? What about the Kashmir conflict between the two nuclear powers? And what about human rights in India, where Dalits and Muslims are lynched in broad daylight while police is watching, or sometimes actually participating in that? To help us understand all of this is a distinguished leader from Wilson Center. The Wilson Center is chartered by the Congress in 1968. It's an official memorial to President Woodrow Wilson, and it's the nation's main nonpartisan policy forum for tracking global issues through independent research and open dialogue to inform actionable ideas for the policy community. Policy community, that's a good question in itself. Our guest is Michael Kugelman. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you. Great to be here with you.
Michael Kugelman is the Deputy Director of Asia Program and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Wilson Center. How long have you been at Wilson Center?
Well, it's hard to believe, but it's actually been more than 15 years. I entered the Wilson Center soon after I concluded graduate school. So July 5th of this year marked 15 years.
Oh, okay. Well, you like to be steady, or you like Woodrow Wilson so much?
It's a combination of both. I've been very fortunate to have a great experience there. And when you're having a great experience, why change a good thing?
I like that's a good one. That's exactly what President Trump is saying. When you're having a good experience, why do you need a change? So tell me, is the Obama administration, his record? I know you need to be nonpartisan all throughout. Now, Biden administration is, Biden is president-elect. If he is indeed survives all the electoral, judicial challenges to his election, do you think there will be major changes in the way U.S. handles human rights?
Well, there's good reason to think the answer is yes. As you've alluded to before, President-elect Biden made a big deal out of the issue of democracy promotion and human rights promotion in his campaign messaging. He didn't really focus all that much on foreign policy in his campaign, which is not unusual. I mean, U.S. presidential elections tend to be focused on domestic issues, and certainly given everything that's going on in the United States now, particularly with the pandemic and the economic crisis and the racial tensions, one would expect Biden to focus mostly on domestic issues. But he did say on a number of occasions that one of his big goals, one of his big foreign policy goals, is to strengthen democracy and strengthen human rights at a moment when both are under significant assault around the world. But of course, the big question is, when does the realpolitik aspect of this take hold? I mean, he could talk a good game about wanting to focus more on strengthening democracy and strengthening human rights, but if he does that, will he really be consistent? And will he be willing to criticize countries out there across the board everywhere that are not doing a good job with democracy and human rights? Or will he be selective and only focus his criticism on the countries that tend to be rivals of the United States? I think that's a big question that will play out.
Well, don't you think this is consistent with the history of US foreign policy, that we are selective in promoting democracy and selective in criticizing human rights and selective in condemning people for human rights?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I think it comes down to the idea that outrage is always selective, that the U.S. government will naturally call out human rights violations where it wants to call them out. And if you look at this most recently, the plight of the Uyghurs in China is very troubling, to be sure. And the Trump administration has been relentless in criticizing the treatment of Uyghurs, because China is the key U.S. rival now. Whereas you look at other cases, Palestinians, Kashmiris, you don't really hear much criticism from U.S. administrations. But what's a bit different now is that in recent years, the U.S. has not really tried to play the role of the world's moral conscience. You haven't had this sense of, you haven't had U.S. governments trying to do the whole democracy promotion thing in a big way. I think you'd have to go back to the Bill Clinton administration, right after the Cold War ended, when there was this big focus in U.S. foreign policy on democracy and human rights. But the Trump administration clearly had no interest in playing the role of moral crusader. But Biden, in terms of his rhetoric at least, he suggests that he's going to go further than Obama ever did, and further than any recent U.S. president since Bill Clinton, or perhaps even back to the days of Jimmy Carter, when morality and moral issues played such a key role in U.S. foreign policy. But you're absolutely right. The U.S. position on these issues of rights and democracy tends to be very hypocritical.
I mean, you mentioned Uyghur name. I mean, on my personal Facebook page, there are I'm a human rights activist, so a lot of Uyghurs have been quite concerned because they were very happy what President Trump has done with China, and they are quite wary of what Biden will do. Do you think Biden, there is some chance he will continue and translate into better action towards China when it comes to not just the trade, but human rights and what is happening with Uyghur, 3 million people, up to 1 million to 3 million people in the concentration camp, definitely the largest camps since the Nazis. Do you think there will be some continuity in that area?
Yes, I do. Certainly, we could get into this. I feel that Biden may be reluctant to criticize certain countries, such as India, when it comes to their human rights violations. But with China, Biden will look at China very similarly to how Trump has looked at China. He will see China as a competitor, as a rival, and certainly as a threat as well. And so Biden is not going to hold back. And in fact, in some of his writings, he had published an article in the Foreign Affairs Journal earlier this year in which he spoke very explicitly about human rights violations in China and his desire to push China on that. So I do think that he will continue to pressure China on that issue. Now, of course, just the fact that a U.S. president, whether it's Biden or Trump or anyone else, calling out, criticizing China for its treatment of Uyghurs, it's not, unfortunately, I don't think that would have an effect. China is an authoritarian state. It's not going to pay any heed or any mind to external pressure, including from the United States. But no, I do see the pressure and the criticism coming from a Biden administration. I think that there's certain marginalized, persecuted, oppressed Muslim communities around the world, that we could be very confident that Biden will take up their cause. And one is the Uyghurs, another is the Rohingya community, which, as you know, has suffered extensively in Burma and beyond as well. I think he'll focus on those as well. So yes, I do think that that those people that are concerned that Biden will try to give China a pass, or that he'll ease up on the pressure on China when it comes to the Uyghurs, I think there will be some continuity there from Trump to Biden. He will continue to be relentless in his criticism of China's terrible policies toward the Uyghur community.
But when it comes to genocide of Rohingyas in Burma, and it is in sort of an installment, but all of that started when President Obama lifted all the sanctions on Burma, trusting more in the personality and the person and the beauty and what else of Aung San Suu Kyi. And that sort of gave a green light to the military there, who was still in 100% in control. So him being a part of Obama administration who carried out the policies, do you think Biden will be more aggressive than, because he will be essentially changing what President Obama did, because there were zero sanctions left when he left. And actually, he rewarded them with GSP, General System of Preferences, while the country which took all those million plus people, Bangladesh, does not have GSP. Burma does. And President Trump didn't change anything from there because McConnell has personal friendship there. Do you think the knowledge of President-elect Biden, who spoke very passionately in support of Bosnians when Europeans were utterly silent, actually criminally silent, when that genocide was going on? He used the word genocide. He pushed for action. He was successful in that area, although Senator Lieberman and I think Congressperson McCloskey in House were also championing that in a bigger way. Do you think he has the similar type of passion which will push him beyond the policies of President Obama vis-a-vis Burma?
Yeah, it's a great point, and you're absolutely right that it was under Obama's watch when the U.S. tried to reach out to Burma and loosened up its policies toward that country. You know, it's hard to say. But I am quite confident that Burma is not going to be a priority country for Joe Biden. Certainly, I think it's clear that what the efforts that the Obama administration had made to try to encourage more liberalization and more democracy in Burma didn't work. I think that's quite clear, and I don't think that Biden's going to want to make another go of it. You could talk about certain countries that the Obama administration, including through the efforts of Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton at that time, efforts to try to improve relations with traditional enemies, whether you're talking about Burma or more prominently Iran. I think with Iran, you're going to see Biden trying to replicate what his former boss did. I imagine that Obama will try to get America to come back into the Iran nuclear deal. I think he's going to try to do what he can to ease tensions with Iran. But Iran's a very different kind of country from Burma, so to speak. And I think that Biden, who I imagine would have had a lot of admiration for Aung San Suu Kyi, of course, the democracy, the hero for democracy for quite some time, she's gone in a very different direction now. And I just imagine that a President Biden will conclude that it just doesn't make sense. It's too risky to try to go back to Burma and to try to do more of these efforts to liberalize, given what's happened with the Rohingya. I mean, Biden knows exactly the terrible things that have happened to the Rohingya over the last few years and the years since the Obama administration made those changes. So, yeah, I'm quite confident that we will see criticism from the Biden administration focused on Burma toward the Rohingya issue. May not take it up as much as he does with the Uyghur issue, but I do think that he'll take it up. And bottom line is he'll conclude that what the Obama administration had tried to do by reaching out, extending an olive branch in an effort to promote more democracy, it didn't work. And I think he doesn't want to make the mistake a second time.
You know, Indian media is talking about what to expect, and they have high expectations that whatever Trump did, those policies will continue because Biden was the one who got the nuclear deal passed through Senate, and he was in the Obama vice president when Defense Pact came into being. One of the small expectation I was surprised to see was that the Trump canceled their GSP, General System of Preferences, and is Biden going to restore that? Do you have any idea if Trump administration did that? Because Christian missionaries all over the country are crying that India is persecuting Christians and, of course, Muslims and Dalit. That's how their GSP got canceled on the human right basis, or it was more President Trump's consistent policies of doing a hard bargain on trade?
Well, it's a good question. I don't know the answer for sure to your question. Certainly, it's true that the Trump administration hasn't really taken much of an interest in religious freedom issues, but the issue of Christian minorities and their persecution in countries, including India, certainly that is an area where there has been a lot of noise made by the Trump administration. So we can't rule anything out. But no, I do think that the reason why the Trump administration revoked GSP privileges was for the other reason that you mentioned, that it was part of this broader trade war. And Trump's consistent focus on high tariffs and any type of trade policy that he feels imperils American jobs or the American economy. And indeed, he did sense that India had very high tariffs on certain goods, including, of all things, Harley Davidson motorcycles. And he was very unhappy with that. And there had been this is true. There had been a series of negotiations. That
seems to be a personal thing for him.
Pardon me?
It seems that that motorcycle issue seems to be very personal for President Trump.
Right, exactly. And especially, which is interesting, because so far as I know, he doesn't ride motorcycles. At least I've never seen him on one. But at any rate, there had been a long number of failed negotiations between Americans and Indians to try to work out pre-existing differences over trade. And I think that they didn't go anywhere. And then I think President Trump decided to take a harder line, which was a pretty big deal. And the two sides are fortunate that move to revoke GSPs did not add further tension to a relationship that otherwise was in a pretty good place during the Trump years.
Do you think Biden will restore the GSP for India?
Well, it's interesting. I think that people like to say that Biden is a real robust supporter of free trade, that he's going to try to undo a lot of these trade wars that Trump found himself in, particularly those involving U.S. partners like India. But I don't know. Biden has been very careful in his messaging to say that he's going to be very cautious with trade agreements and trade relationships, and he's not going to sign on to any new trade agreement until he's sure that there are assurances for environmental considerations and labor considerations. So that suggests that he's going to be cautious. So I think that his administration will be a more flexible negotiator than the Trump administration one will be. I mean, the Biden administration will not be nearly as protectionist as the Trump administration, which was probably more protectionist than any U.S. administration for quite a few years. But I don't think, for those in New Delhi that think that with a free trader in the White House that all of these trade tensions are going to melt away, I think that would be a mistake to make. I think it could take time to work out these trade issues, which at the end of the day have long been the Achilles heel of the U.S.-India relationship. There's been a lot of progress on the security side, a lot of arms sales and that type of thing, but there's these trade issues predate the Trump administration by a long time. It's always been an issue since the early 90s when the two countries started to get their relationship on a better position.
Well, Senator Warren, in one of her, Democratic presidential debate, mentioned she would like to appoint a human right advocate in each trade negotiations. I thought that was pretty applied aspect of, very clear action item she added to that. I don't remember if anybody else committing to something like that. But when you mention what Biden administration might do in trade negotiation, you also did not mention human rights. Do you think there is any possibility of anyone picking on that idea?
Well, I mean, as we discussed, human rights has been put out there by the Biden campaign as a key priority area for foreign policy. And so, I think that the Biden administration risks causing some harm to its foreign policy agenda if it goes out there and promotes democracy and human rights as a big priority, and yet is then selective and doesn't bring it up at an issue in a country like India, even if that's a partner. So I think that there will be a lot of pressure from within a Biden White House to bring out the human rights issue in the India context. But I do think that there will be limits to how far that criticism will go.
Thank you so much. You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and we're talking with a scholar from Woodrow Wilson Center, Michael Kugelman, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Adam. You remember me? I appeared in so many episodes that Sound Vision has put on the market. No matter what. Hey, what's happening? Hey, oh, sorry. Lockdown is what it is. Well, continuing here. In this lockdown, Sound Vision never stops thinking about you, the viewer. We'll have to get back into production again, online and inline. Everybody in their own space, even me. Although I'm stuck with Lanisa.
Salam! Salam! Salam!
I know, you were shocked too. Well, let me continue. This is what I was going to say. Salam! 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 Cut! Finally, I get my own screen time again. Thank God. And so we invested in new equipment to bring you even better production with new songs and new singers and animations. Well, here are a few clips. And Sound Vision has brought all this into your home, making Islamic values and teachings easy. And if you know me, Adam, a multi-talented actor, well, sometimes I'm an actor and the reporter and the... Oh, that's enough. Let's move on to the next section. Well, you can watch these new episodes on our new app at www.adamsworldapp.com. We have previews happening every day on Muslim Network TV. Sound vision has been serving generations, moving and changing with the times. We are all faithfully connected. That is a huge blessing. Your donation helps keep these programs available now and into the future. We take this job of helping tomorrow's Muslims today seriously, and you should too. Today, we need your help. Children absorb and learn from everything they encounter. Make that wholesome, positive, grounded in our faith. Together, we can accomplish our goal of raising better Muslims, better neighbors, and better citizens. Please donate generously.
It's an investment in our future.
To finish, let me tell you, there are new scripts of my new mission. And it is something that I enjoy talking about. My new mission is space. Houston, we do not have a problem. Salam, see you soon.
Me too.
This is Imam Malik Mujahid. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid with Michael Kugelman from Woodrow Wilson Center. I keep saying Woodrow Wilson Center. Was there a name change, or there is some other institution with Woodrow Wilson name?
Well, I mean, our formal name is Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, but the idea is that's a bit of a mouthful. So the idea was to come up with a shorthand to call it the Wilson Center. But yes, we are oftentimes confused with the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton. And I'm happy to be mistaken for a Princeton institution, but that's the one that people confuse us with the most.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I was in a think tank meeting in France, and ACLU secretary was with the secretary of their board, and her job was at Wilson Center, and we talked quite a bit about that. And she sent me some books she has written about, I think, some Palestinian and Israeli women. She herself was of Jewish heritage, and she was very proud of her work there. Tell me this, a little bit about Afghanistan. What are the current U.S. goals in Afghanistan?
Well, I think the U.S. goals in Afghanistan are very simple, and they're also bipartisan in the sense that both major political parties feel the same way about them. The first goal is to support a very fragile but nonetheless fledgling peace process in Afghanistan, which began in just the last few weeks. It started with a U.S. negotiation with the Taliban that led to an agreement with the Taliban calling for the withdrawal of U.S. forces, with all of them meant to leave by the spring of next year, so long as the Taliban upholds commitments to deny space to terrorists. So that's the first goal, is to support a peace process in Afghanistan with the hope of facilitating an end to the war. And the second goal in Afghanistan, quite frankly, is to get out. As I mentioned before, there is a deal with the Taliban that stipulates that U.S. troops leave. As I'm sure you would know, the U.S. war in Afghanistan, it's barely discussed here in the United States. I mean, it comes up in the headlines sometimes, but it's barely discussed. It's very unpopular here in the U.S. And Biden certainly will want to get out. Trump had wanted to get out. But the challenge will be how to pursue that goal in a way that it doesn't make people think too much about the very ugly U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam. The idea is to develop some type of withdrawal plan in which U.S. forces can withdraw gradually and peacefully, and preferably with violence not taking place on the ground as those U.S. troops withdraw. Because a lot of critics think that the U.S. simply got a deal with the Taliban that amounts to a surrender. It basically stipulates that U.S. troops are going to get out at a certain time, even though there's no guarantee that the war will end when they do.
So you mentioned two goals. How would President Trump, see those two goals? Is the second goal of getting out of it will be his top priority? Because he promised to will get out by Christmas, and there are about 4,500 people left. Do you think he will see that as a priority goal than the first goal, which you stated?
Well, I mean, I think that Trump and Biden see eye to eye in the sense that they both want to withdraw, but I do think that the difference lies in the pace and the scope of this withdrawal. And indeed, President Trump, has really wanted to get out. And, he had said that when he first became president and announced his Afghanistan strategy, he called for U.S. troops to stay in Afghanistan. He actually even increased the number of U.S. troops by a modest number. And when he did that, when he announced that strategy, he said that he went against his own instincts to stay. So he clearly has wanted to get out. Now, of course, when he announced by tweet that he basically wanted to bring all U.S. troops home by Christmas, that was really a political message, not a declaration of policy. He was trying to get support from his rank and file who don't support the idea of extended military presences around the world. It would be wholly unrealistic, if not impossible, logistically, to remove a large number of U.S. troops from Afghanistan within just a few weeks. That simply could not happen.
Why can that happen? 4,500 people divided by Jammu.
Yeah.
And we're doing 10 flights.
Right. Well, no, this is true. I mean, sort of taking it as in an isolated case, indeed, you can move 4,500 people somewhere, but you've got equipment, material, large weaponry. You need to work out how to remove that, what paths to take to get that material out. So it would simply be unrealistic. But there are many, including myself, that think that President Trump, if push comes to shove, and had he been reelected, he probably would have been convinced by his advisors that it doesn't make sense to take all troops out, that there's a need to try to keep some troops in the country as leverage vis-a-vis the Taliban, basically by saying, well, look, we're not going to take all of our troops out of the country until you've made a more of a commitment to reducing the violence that you were waging against the Afghan security forces and Afghan civilians. I do think that Trump would have been willing to accept this idea of a small contingent, mostly counterterrorism focused. And that's exactly what Biden wants. He wants to bring troops out as well, but he has long called for this idea of counterterrorism light presence, meaning a force of about 2,000 or so, maybe even less, for troops in Afghanistan. They are only to provide counterterrorism assistance to the Afghan security forces if desired. Now, of course, that could present a dilemma in that the Taliban has insisted, per the agreement it signed with the U.S., that every single U.S. troop must be out of the country by next spring, and it would not agree to this idea of a small but nonetheless residual presence of U.S. troops in the country.
And also the issue of Taliban were called terrorists and all that before. I mean, we were supporting them, then they became enemies, then now we have a negotiation. So what terrorist could be applied to anybody if there are 2,000 people? And again, you're going after terrorists. I mean, we are not the smartest of the drone attackers in the world, are we? I mean, we eliminated wedding parties through drone attacks and things like that. So differentiation between a gentleman with the shalwar kameez, Afghan dress, a terrorist will dress that way, and so is the different factions of Afghanistan. And sitting in somewhere in Wisconsin, operating a video machine to kill people. When fighting terrorism is going to create the type of environment in which more terrorists will prevail. So the question will come, then people will start attacking those 2,000 US troops that, hey, these are the people who are killing us. So war and terrorism, don't you think it is going to be a very difficult type of decisions in terms of policy and the war technology?
No, you make a great point. And there's so many reasons why the U.S. war effort has gone wrong over the years. And I would argue that, sort of reflecting your own point, one of the reasons is that the U.S. has simply never had a clear strategy and a sound plan for Afghanistan. It's never really appropriately defined why it's there, why it's fighting. It did do that initially. When U.S. troops first entered Afghanistan in October 2001, there were two clear-cut goals. One was to eliminate the al-Qaeda sanctuaries used to help plot the 9/11 attacks, and two, to remove the Al-Qaeda's Taliban hosts from power when the Taliban refused to give up Al-Qaeda leaders. But then after those two goals were achieved fairly early on in the war, you had this extended mission creep where the Bush administration, then Obama, weren't really able to define why exactly U.S. troops were still in the country and still dying in the country with no clear plan. But to your question about terrorism, it's a good point. And the U.S. government has never thought of the Taliban as terrorists. I mean, the U.S. has never designated the Afghan Taliban as a terrorist organization. But when you hear this focus on counterterrorism, the focus is really directed toward the ISIS terror group, Daesh, which, as you know, had for quite some time been doing horrible things in Syria and Iraq and beyond. About 5 or 6 years ago, it established a faction, an affiliate in Afghanistan. And it's done some pretty horrible things. It's staged a number of attacks. It's been able to carve out a bastion in Nangarhar province in eastern Afghanistan. It's not as potent as the Taliban is, but it is there, and it does pose a threat. And I think that for U.S. policymakers, whether you're talking about those in a Biden administration or a Trump administration, they would really worry about that ISIS threat. And because this is a threat that targets...
Right now, according to recent news items, that the United States is providing air support to Taliban action against the ISIS presence in Afghanistan. So it seems that we not only had agreement with Taliban of some sort, but also cooperation in field against a common enemy. So what is the state of relationship with Taliban at this moment?
Well, yeah, this is where things get really weird with this war, that the U.S. Is willing to look at the Taliban potentially as a counterterrorism partner, because it's true that the Taliban, like the United States, opposes the Islamic terror group. And it is true that the Taliban has actually, it's fighting its war against Afghan security forces, but the Taliban is also battling against ISIS. Why would that happen? Well, ISIS is a terror group that is opposed, is a rival of Al-Qaeda. And the Taliban has long been closely aligned with Al-Qaeda. So the Taliban would oppose any terror group that is not aligned with Al-Qaeda, which is why it's going after ISIS. But in terms of the relationship between the U.S. and the Taliban, I had been joking on a number of occasions in recent weeks that at times it appears that the U.S. government has a better relationship with the Taliban than it does with the Afghan government, right? That's because the U.S. and the Taliban negotiated, and they had a successful negotiation leading to an agreement in which the Afghan government was not involved in the negotiation at all. The U.S. has been very frustrated at what it perceives to be obstructionism from the Afghan government toward launching and sustaining the current peace process. Whereas the Taliban the U.S. has actually praised the Taliban for being a responsible peace partner, which sounds a little weird. And I think the Biden administration wouldn't get into that type of rhetoric. But
why does it sound weird to you? Because according to a whole lot of scholarship out there, U.S. was involved in creation of Taliban with support from Pakistan. If that is true, then we came in conflict with them, and now we are allies. So maybe some of the old guard who may not have died or their children are in good contact with the United States. What's the possibility of that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And indeed, you're right. The U.S., along with the Pakistanis and the Saudis and some others, worked with Mujahideen fighters to target the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. And of course, those fighters later evolved into the Taliban. So yeah, absolutely. The U.S. did used to work closely with what became the Taliban. But when I say that it's sort of weird and not very good optics when you have senior U.S. officials praising the Taliban, is that when you're doing that, and when you're not doing that with the Afghan government, when you're being critical or something like that, it does create the impression that you're siding with the Taliban over a government that may be very troubled and corrupt and so on, but is a democratically elected government, whereas the Taliban, of course, has done horrible things. So I think that the optics of that are not very good at all. But again, it goes to your point that the U.S. Has had a very complex relationship with the Taliban and its precursors, certainly for quite some time.
Are there some of those Taliban who were arrested after Taliban's defeat in the US invasion were brought into Guantanamo Bay? Are some of those Afghans and their partners still Guantanamo Bay?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the exact identities of all of those that are still at Guantanamo Bay, but certainly there have been Afghans there, and I believe there have been some cases of Taliban fighters that have been in Guantanamo Bay that have been released, including those involved in a swap for the U.S. POW, Bo Bergdahl. And I believe that some of those Taliban fighters have actually returned to the battlefield and been fighting again, which they should not have been doing per the agreement. But I don't know the exact number, if there are still Afghan nationals that are in Guantanamo Bay. But this is a problem. There's so little transparency when it comes to that place that who knows what's really going on. But I'm certainly not inclined to think that there are good things happening at that facility right now.
Is there transparency when it comes to the actual deal US has with Taliban? I heard of some provision being referenced in different media reports that Taliban, according to the peace deal, are allowed to continue their attacks against the Afghan government. Is there a provision?
Well, you're right. No, there's not transparency. All that has been come into the public domain from that U.S. Taliban negotiation and the deal is a 3-page document that lays out certain things. But there's plenty that does not appear in that 3-page document that U.S. officials suggest is still the case. I mean, what is that? The publicly released document, it does not oblige the Taliban to do anything in terms of reducing violence or anything like that. All it obliges the Taliban to do is to deny space to terror groups that pose threats to the U.S. and its allies. And yet you've had U.S. officials giving statements and making speeches in which they say that its agreement with the Taliban obliges the Taliban to reduce violence and not stage attacks here and there. So there's a lot of inconsistency. And there have been these reports of so-called secret annexes, this idea that there are parts of the agreement that were never released to the public and that contain additional provisions. And I understand that some members of Congress on certain committees have been given access to these secret annexes and have read them. The Republicans that have read these have not said much, but a few of the Democrats that have read them have said that, there's nothing really meaningful in these secret annexes. But bottom line is no one really knows what's going on here. No one really knows what features are included in this agreement beyond what we have in this 3-page publicly released document.
How critical has been Pakistan's role in U.S. negotiation with the Taliban?
Well, I mean, initially it played an instrumental role. President Trump actually directly contacted Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, to request Pakistan's assistance in helping bring Taliban negotiators to the table to talk to the United States. And as I understand it, Pakistan complied on all levels. And what's particularly notable is that there's a senior Afghan Taliban figure who had been in prison in Pakistan for about a decade. His name was Mullah Baradar. The Pakistanis released him from prison. And right after that, he traveled to Doha, where he became a top negotiator in talks with the United States. So I think that shows that Pakistan was helpful. But I would argue that while Pakistan was helpful in that regard, we shouldn't overstate that assistance just because the Taliban itself have long been open to direct talks with the United States. So for Pakistan to try to get the Taliban to go there, it's sort of like pushing open a door that's already halfway open. Certainly releasing Mullah Baradar from prison was a big deal. But
so
beyond that...
Will that be then connect to the point that the Taliban were willing to let Bin Laden, disconnect with Bin Laden at the eve of the U.S. invasion? Is there a truth to that information which has been repeated by many people?
Well, I mean, there's still a lot that's not clear. And I know that U.S. officials have long leaned on Pakistan to try to pressure the Taliban to do certain things that are things the U.S. wants them to do, including giving up Bin Laden. And that didn't work. And I think more recently, the U.S. has pressured Pakistan to push the Taliban to agree to reduce violence or even to agree to a ceasefire. And none of that has worked. And that's not a surprise because, the Taliban, it's got the upper hand. It's involved in negotiations at the same time that it's fighting a war that it thinks is winning. So it's happy to just give up on talks if it doesn't like where they're going. And so that puts Pakistan in a difficult spot where it has to try to push the Taliban to do something that's unlikely to do. And if Pakistan doesn't succeed in that regard, probably the U.S. will blame Pakistan for things not going well at the negotiating table. But that's a whole separate issue that gets to the rather tricky and oftentimes dysfunctional relationship between the U.S. and Pakistan.
You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid talking with Woodrow Wilson scholar Michael Kugelman, and we'll be right back after these messages.
My wife, she's a professor at the University of Cincinnati, who's Catholic, and by her watching and listening to our 3-year-old son watch Adam's World, she ended up taking Kalima Shahada. She embraced Islam because she learned so much about Islam and the other prophets. It really affected our life in a great way, and because of Sound Vision and Adam's World, we're Muslims.
I took my Shahada 15 years ago, and I actually am from a rural part of Ohio. And so I found the catalog for Sound Vision, and I ordered the tapes and the CDs and the books, and I used those, and especially for my little daughter, that's how we basically learned our Islam, and Islam entered our hearts through the wonderful works of Sound Vision.
Okay, assalamu alaikum, brother. I just want you to know that I love the Sound Vision website, that a lot of times when I'm looking for information, especially as it relates to homelessness, domestic violence, and women issues, I go to that website, and then I see what you've written, and then I copy and paste it, and spread the word, because the wisdom is there, so I can't do any better than what Sound Vision has already done.
Sound Vision is our survival guide. It is the organization that provides skills for Muslims how to survive and thrive in this community here in the U.S.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Anam, I'm in 11th grade, and I grew up with Adam's World, and what it taught me was unity, respect, and love for the Muslim Ummah.
Adam's World is the greatest show ever made. Take me to the Kaaba, man. I love that puppet.
Assalamu alaikum!
Open up your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppet stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe, and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid with Michael Kugelman from Woodrow Wilson Center. Now, President Trump has publicly stated more than once that he is willing to mediate between India and Pakistan, two nuclear powers, and Kashmir issue. He has also said that India did not like the idea, which India, in terms of dialogue and conversation with Pakistan, it seems to continuously abstain or deny. Now, Biden has issued several statements about what India is doing in Kashmir. Do you think President-elect Biden will have any difference result or any other effort? Do you think he will invest any of his capital, being a long-term friend of India, to have some settlement and relationship with Pakistan on Kashmir issue?
Well, I know that Pakistanis hope that the answer to your question is yes. I don't think that we should get our hopes up, so to speak. I really don't think this is an issue. Kashmir is not an issue that Biden is going to want to push. This is an issue that most U.S. administrations don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. And particularly in more recent years, as the U.S.-India relationship has continued to grow and as there's a bipartisan consensus that's emerged in Washington, it's important not to rub India the wrong way, not to antagonize India. And there's no better way to antagonize India than to put yourself out there and suggest that you want to be the one that mediates a solution to a dispute that for India is not even a dispute anymore at this point. And I would argue that Trump actually did not really go against longstanding policy of not getting involved. I mean, yes, you're right. Trump did say several times, I think 2 or 3 times, that he would be willing to mediate, but he would couch that in this caveat that he would do it, he would mediate if both sides ask. And of course, India will never ask. So to me, that seems like it's not really an offer of mediation. If you're basically saying something that you know is not going to happen, India is not going to ask. But in terms of Biden, getting back to the point we discussed earlier in our conversation about the issue of rights, I think that if a Biden administration is to invoke the issue of Kashmir, it would be in the context of rights. It would not be in the context of territoriality or the Kashmir dispute itself. It would be in the context of rights. I think that we could expect perhaps a Biden White House to bring attention to the fact that you've got 7-8 million Kashmiri Muslims in the Kashmir Valley that live in terrible conditions and are oppressed in a context that many people describe as an occupation. Biden would not describe it as an occupation, but I do think that if he were to bring up Kashmir, it would be in that context of the human rights violations that take place every day.
Do you think there is any chance that Kashmiris themselves will have a voice in this matter, or it will be just India dictating the opinions they have?
Well, I think you've hit on such an important point, and this is something that I try to bring home so much. I feel that Kashmiri views are so often undermined, if not silenced, and hijacked by these dominant narratives that are put out there by not just India, but also by Pakistan. Mm-hmm. And of course, as you know, it's very difficult for Kashmiri voices to get out there just because of the frequent communication bans and the internet bans and all of that. Those were intensified after the revocation of Article 370. So Kashmiris have to depend on those in the diaspora, those that live abroad in Europe and the US, but that's not the same thing as hearing from Kashmiris on the ground. So unfortunately, the answer to your question is no. I don't think we're going to hear Kashmiri voices in the way that we would like. It's important to hear voices from Kashmir as to what do they think their region should look like. What do they think their relationship with India should be? Do they want independence? Do they want to join Pakistan? What do they think Pakistan's role should be? We don't have Kashmiris answering these questions. And even when they're given an opportunity to address those questions, I think many of them would be very fearful that India would retaliate against them and their families if they were to say things that India would not want to hear.
Well, India's issues of human rights are not limited to the occupation of Kashmir. And India and Pakistan both have statements, but not voices of Kashmiris, which are clearly there. I agree with you there. But India's issues of human rights are broader. I mean, broad daylight lynching of Dalit who are former untouchables takes place, and so is of Muslims. Attacks on places of worship takes place. But when the U.S. International Commission on Religious Freedom, Yusuf, tries to go there, they are not given a visa even to visit India. When U.S. Senator wants to go to Kashmir, he is not allowed to enter Kashmir. Now, Amnesty International, for God's sake, how come Amnesty International is biting India? What is happening in India when it comes to human rights?
Well, I think that we're seeing the manifestations of a government that reflects very strong authoritarian tendencies. I think that's quite clear. And some of the issues that you mentioned, I mean, the lynchings, the communal tensions and the communal violence, that of course has always been there, festering either below or above the surface. I mean, there have been horrific communal riots that have taken place on a number of occasions over the years, but what you have now is a government that really subscribes to this idea of Hindutva, Hindu nationalism, trying to elevate the position of Hindus in both society and politics to the detriment of the very large religious minorities in India, mainly the Muslim community, for sure. And I think the concern is that India is starting to undercut the secular pluralistic traditions that are meant to be protected by its constitution. This is certainly very concerning. And I think what's really worrisome is the rhetoric coming from very senior Indian leaders, not necessarily Modi himself, but someone like Amit Shah, as interior minister, who's probably the second most powerful political figure in India, saying things like referring to Muslim migrants as termites. And if you have the chief minister of one of the biggest states in India saying that he hopes that Muslims drown in the rivers, I mean, this is just incredibly nasty, overt hate speech. It doesn't get any worse than that. And I fear that that has emboldened hardliners to look for Muslims and attack them, that type of thing. Very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous.
So yeah, I mean, it is known. I mean, first time probably in American media, some of those news is coming out as well. But the prestigious institution in Washington, D.C., Genocide Watch, has issued 2 genocide alerts on India, on Assam as well as Kashmir. But do you think human rights in India is going to be one of those countries where Biden administration is going to ignore human rights and focus on relationship with India in terms of selling more arms and ammunitions and nuclear cooperation, and maybe debate a little bit on the trade? Is it going to be one of those untouchable country when it comes to human rights in India?
So first, I just to clarify one of my points, I would not argue that human rights violations in India are going to get to the point of a situation where we have to worry about genocide. You're talking about huge numbers of people that would have to be impacted, huge numbers of people that would die. I don't think we're at that point. Certainly not to understate the seriousness of human rights violations. To your question, as I said earlier, I do think that the Biden administration will be much more willing to call out India for its human rights violations, not just in Kashmir, but in terms of new laws, new policies that discriminate against minorities, against religious minorities. I think you will get criticism from the Biden White House, but there won't be all that much of it. And when you have it, I think that the tone, when it's expressed publicly, will be relatively muted. And I think that Biden would look as a guide to what his former boss did 5 years ago, Barack Obama, when he made a trip to New Delhi as president. He made a speech, I'm sure you remember this, he made a speech in New Delhi in which he very gently called out India for its religious freedom record. And even though it was very gentle, it was very subtle, it was very restrained, even that got a lot of people in New Delhi angry, which shows the degree of sensitivity here. So Biden won't hold back, but he's also not going to go all out either with his criticism, just because it's a very simple matter. This is cold hard interests winning the day here. That for any U.S. government, whether controlled by Republicans or Democrats, will see India as a key player that is going to work with the U.S. to try to counterbalance what's perceived as a rising threat posed by China in the Indo-Pacific region.
So it has been a long-term continuity in that policy between multiple administration. One of the things which irks Pakistani tremendously was when President-elect Biden's boss, Obama administration, started calling AFPAC. They simply hate it, and negotiation will not go forward. Do you expect that AFPAC will be coming back?
Yeah, good question. It may, maybe not formally, but certainly, I'll be very honest, and I think this is a mistake that, so many U.S. administrations look at Pakistan and the relationship with Pakistan through the lens of Afghanistan. And I think that, at least initially, a Biden White House will do that too, just because when it looks at in its relationship with Pakistan, it'll be thinking above all, what is Pakistan doing to try to help us in Afghanistan? How can we get Pakistan to push the Taliban more? So they'll be grouped together.
So then they will keep asking another key phrase which Pakistanis hate: do more. So,
yes. Yeah, well, I think that the tone won't be as sharp, though. Of course, I mean, Trump was, it was the Obama administration that was doing the do more stuff, and it was not the Trump administration. I think there are some quarters in Pakistan that actually appreciate the Trump administration for sort of letting up on that pressure rhetoric. It was there for the first year of the Trump administration, but then when the U.S. decided that it needed to work with Pakistan to get its interests achieved in Afghanistan, then the tone changed. The relationship improved, and the pressuring and the name calling and the do moreism and all that, it stopped very suddenly.
All right. So the last question, you have been very helpful. It has been very, very interesting, and I learned from you. Does the U.S. still maintain bases in Pakistan?
Well, so far as, I mean, me as an analyst, I don't have access to classified information that could tell a different story that I'm not aware of. But indeed, the U.S. does not use bases, so far as I know, in Pakistan. It had for quite some time. The CIA had used several bases to launch drone strikes, but things changed in 2011 when the U.S.-Pakistan relationship was a big mess. And you had, as I understand it, a large number of CIA operatives who were basically forced to leave the country at that time. The U.S. intelligence presence in Pakistan is nowhere near what it used to be some years back. But at the end of the day, who really knows what's going on? But officially, at least, the U.S. is not using these bases, and the drone war, of course, is also winded down. It's very rare when you have a drone strike these days. So the U.S. need to use bases in Pakistan is not what it had been. But one big question is, after you have a withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, if the U.S. wants to maintain a counterterrorism capacity in Afghanistan, and if the Taliban says that the U.S. can no longer base troops in Afghanistan, would the U.S. ask Pakistan to let the U.S. use bases in Pakistan for counterterrorism missions in Afghanistan? I imagine the answer from Pakistan would be a very quick no, but it does raise an interesting question.
Well, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to talk to you, Michael Kugelman, and look forward to talking to you in future as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Sher Dilkhan and Dr. Abdul Wahid, for producing today's show. And thank you for watching. You have been watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, which covers the whole United States, as well as Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, your own iPhone and Android app of Muslim Network TV, and our website, muslimnetwork.tv. Peace. Salam.